Betsy, I am so excited to welcome you here today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
The topic that we're going to talk about today, courage, is a really interesting topic to me. Actually, I just finished Brene Brown's new book, Strong Ground, all about courage, all about empathy and all of those great things. And I want to start by just level setting a bit of a definition. So what does courage mean to you, or how do you define courage? And maybe how has that shifted, if any, throughout your career?
It's funny you bring up Brene Brown because to be honest, I hadn't read her books or even listened to her podcast, which in some regards makes kind of defining it more authentic, I think, to my own experiences. Although I think the world of her and have listened to several of her other podcasts or, YouTube channels or chats she's had, and I think we have a lot in common. But she's certainly the subject matter expert. So for me, it means following that pit in the gut of your stomach and taking action with it.
Mm,
So whether that shows up in relationships with people or outcomes that we want in in organizations I've worked at, but it's something physiological for me about driving towards what you're setting off to achieve. And so when you start to listen to that, it really shows up. You can hear it more when it shows up more regularly.
mm, awesome. And you've recently taken on a whole lot of courage and moved into your own business. And I love the name Unbridled Courage Consulting. And it's such a powerful image. So what does unbridled courage mean to you in the context of leadership? And why did you choose that name?
But having courage or being courageous has been throughout my life, but there's different ways that's shown up. In the last 2 years, my husband and I have made some very bold decisions in the ways that we wanted to live our life and raise our children. And that has all kind of converged. And so, between doing some workshopping on what my values are, courage has shown up. And in ways that actually, one of the biggest, most profound ways that it showed up was a time when I almost put myself in harm's way because the courage to do the right thing and help someone did consequently put me in a pretty tough situation, one that everything worked out. And then fast forward to our decision to buy a farm. That took courage, a lot of
Yeah.
courage, but our decision to buy the farm and this huge decision to kind of launch and go out on my own, I really wanted to have the name of my company represent the farm, and the start of the farm
Mm,
was our rescue horse, our rescue thoroughbred. And so kind of thinking about ways in which how is there a through line with equine and horses and riding, and then the courage
mm,
and unbridled courage was born. And just again, that power of taking off the reins, taking off anything restraints that hold you back and being able
mm,
to run free. So it's that the imagery is
mm.
intended, but certainly was inspired by horsemanship, and then courage had to be in there because it's one of my if not my biggest value.
So beautiful. And I didn't think of, right, like the horse wears a bridle when you are controlling it, but when the bridle comes off, that's when they can run free. And so I love that metaphor.
Well, and then in really strong horsemanship, you can take the bridle off and still do everything with your horse.
Oh,
So that was even something we worked on. His name is Zaya, and so he was a racehorse. He was 6 years racing. And so when he came to the farm, and then there's kind of this honeymoon stage with horses where for the
mm,
first few months they really are on their best behavior, and then they start to feel comfortable, and then you actually start to see some of their,
mm,
you know, day-to-day behavior. And so, and engaged with a trainer, but all we did for the first 6 months was groundwork. So
mm,
got to a place that I could take his halter off and he would continue to walk next to me, or move when I would move from left to right, back or forward. And so even in riding, there's a vision there of like how you lead your company without having being tight to the reins,
mm.
but can you still lead your company and achieve things that you never thought were possible without having these tight constraints on your people in your organization.
Totally. I love the saying, the best manager manages himself out of a job. Meaning that like you create a team, you create an environment where you've empowered other people. I love that metaphor and that relationship between not just in the barn, but in the boardroom, which is, I love that you've got the barn, the boardroom, and now you're doing something on your own as well. So how have all of those different experiences, Betsy, contributed to your leadership philosophy and how you work now with clients?
One of my favorite books growing up was Betsy and the Boys. So without bearing the lead too much, to being an athlete or a tomboy, right? I mean, and I'm connecting that in the sense with the barn, but having all these different experiences, not being afraid to get my hands dirty, whether or not that's literally on the farm or in different roles I've had, whether or not it be washing dishes to, working behind the line to cleaning up a spill, whatever that is in hospitality that's needed. And then to leading a team doing that. So I think that's been an important through line, is being able to connect with people in all different sorts of positions, regardless if it
Mm.
is the executive team or the group of board members, being able to communicate in that format, as well as being behind the scenes in a kitchen and a team member being able to feel comfortable, like we're just having a conversation and can look beyond the suit and the high heels.
Mm.
So that's how I think that kind of that barn analogy
Yeah.
translates to in a work setting.
And so I want to talk a bit about transformation. So when you work with your leaders and organizations, what kind of transformation are you hoping to accomplish with your clients?
So I want to meet clients where they're at. And so whether or not that's someone who really is a small or medium sized company and they've got a lot of great things, a lot of great foundation,
Mhm.
but sometimes they just have that one sticky situation, or the CEO or one another member of the executive team is looking for some support and to be able to get some feedback from a subject matter expert, and call that my CHRO on call.
Yeah.
All the way through to a client that is really lacking in systems and standards, or even a lead in the space of people and culture or HR. And so I can help clients, whether or not that's meeting with their leadership team, to leading, working beside and with one of their HR leads or people and culture leads. But the goal in with any of those client relationships is starting with foundational systems and helping them to identify how are we selecting talent, attracting talent and retaining top talent. So the systems part of this, is so critical, because the more individuals you have in an organization that are part of decision making, the more that that's going to get diluted from what the overarching goal or objective is. Deal client, kind of premium ideal client,
Mhm.
believes core values are really important, because that
Mm.
gives us a centralized way to build all of our systems from.
Mm.
And not just core values in the sense of three words on a wall, but like what are the
Mm.
behaviors that show up in who we identify as top talent? And then how do we select and reward and retain, and then and or create accountability when those behaviors aren't present, or we're looking for more of those behaviors in someone that we want to select or promote. So
Mm.
that's ideal, is being able to start on a foundation of core values and then building out all of the systems to support that, so that you can, like, then that you can kind of take the reins off, remove the reins, remove the bridle, and your whole team is still working to achieve the vision and the goals that you have to reach. And we know that, right? Research says that when our people feel safe and when they have a common goal, we can achieve
Mhm.
results that we didn't even establish that we wanted to achieve, when everyone feels like they're working on the same team.
Mm. Feels like, Betsy, the foundation of what you're talking about is values. So if you're working with a client that maybe hasn't quite figured out their values yet, or like you said, the incongruency between words on a paper and behavior, how do you help them either create, understand, know what their values are, and then live by them?
Well, it's not an easy feat to do, but I think it starts with the leader being vulnerable about, their strengths and then their weaknesses.
Hmm.
And so then you can build out those values based on, what are the values that where I need to select for to round out what it is that I need as the CEO or the leader
Hmm.
of this organization in my people, to what are the things that are, no, there's permission to play. Like, these are going to be
Hmm.
imperative for us all to have synergy. So for myself, I would say positivity is one of those things, like perseverance, positivity, and grit to get
Mhm.
it done. And so it would be really hard for me to have someone on my team that
Mhm.
is constantly a Debbie Downer or doesn't want to connect to what the overarching mission. And so if someone's not mission driven in their own sense, I'm going to feel like I'm always pulling them along and dragging. And that's just going to
Mhm.
create tension that may not be necessary to make it a really good fit. But I also know that I can get really big idea focused and not be drawn down onto the details and working through the nuances. Okay,
Mhm.
well, that's where I'm going to want to select people on my team that are detail oriented. So
Mm.
some of those things may vary on the position, but that's a broader example. The point being that when the CEO can say, here's what's important to me to achieve our goals, and here are the behaviors that are going to be necessary for us on the team to achieve, then you can start talking about how are we selecting for that and how are we retaining for that.
Mhm. I love that. I spent many years in recruiting, many, many years, and experience and being able to do the job is baseline. But really, what helps you create a star employee, someone that's going to help you move the needle, someone who's going to be engaged, is someone who aligns with your values. And so starting with a values alignment, even when recruiting, and then also understanding, which I think you were talking about as well, what's not just hiring the same, but having someone that's complementary. So understanding the difference between core values, which you need to share, but then how do you hire someone that has a complementary skill set? So I might be great with people, but maybe not as great with the numbers. So I want to hire someone that has same values as me, but that can complement me on those things that are shortcomings. One of the values that you said is one of yours, and obviously it comes through in everything that you do, Betsy, is courage. And so what is courageous leadership, not just in theory, but in practice? And maybe how do you define the difference between the theory and the practical?
I've been thinking about that one a lot. You know, what drives me into action and how I would define what courageous leadership is in practice is caring so deeply enough that your only option is to do something. And for me it might be care for the overall success of the organization to individuals. I think everyone can find that courage. And if it's not specific to caring, then it may be specific to being the best. Okay, if that's what drives you, then doing something about it is the courage. And
Mm,
I think courage invokes action and not
mm,
just emotion. Now, some of that action can be driven from what is that emotion. I think I kind of led with that in the beginning. Like, how do I define it? And it's this pit in your stomach, like, oh, I need to do something. I need to say something. I need to stand up for someone. I need to take
mhm,
action on this. And so, in action, it's for me personally, it's caring so deeply about something that there is no other choice than to take
mm.
action because it represents your brand. And doing something is a part of, or taking action or showing up in behavior is the fastest thing that actually defines your brand versus the things that we say that we are or who we
Right.
are.
Yeah, absolutely. I wear my favorite color of lipstick is called Brave. And that's one of my, which is so similar to courage. And every time I put it on, truly, before I speak in public, before I record something on social media, before I, go on a podcast, for me, what needs my bravery and what needs courage is putting myself out there. And what is it for you? Have you had a moment in your career or something that you do that puts you in that fear or uncertainty where you have to dig deep and find that courage or that bravery?
I think there's one that really comes to mind. And I think what made that pit in my stomach kind of really churn was other people around the table were not like me. And so we were talking about the design for some multi room sleeping quarters, and around the table were men, and these were going to be co-ed sleeping quarters. And the dialogue was about how do we need to establish this so that it's co-ed and what is necessary.
Mm,
I wouldn't say that there was any disrespect around the table, but there was bias due to lack of one's own personal experience. And so the dialogue was circulating around what is or isn't necessary of a cohabitation. And so I think being different, being worried about how my opinion would show up and whether or not it would show up as overtly feminine or just, do I have a place at this table? Which in hindsight was crazy to have even gotten worried about because it was fully respected. But oof, I felt the butterflies, I felt the pit
Yeah.
in my stomach. And I finally said, with all due respect, you are all gentlemen sitting around the table. And as a gentleman, you don't ever have to walk down a city street and hear a cat call or be introduced to someone and you get this side look, wondering if you're being checked out, wondering if someone's lurking behind you. That is just not something as a man that you, if ever, have to really think about. And so as a woman, yes, we would want two doors between us and where the men are sleeping because that extra door creates a level of we're in our space that we know is kind of respected as a females only. And so, you know, that moment, that courage to be able to say, I'm the only one at that moment at the table that has a different perspective relative to the conversation that we're having. And it did, it changed how architecturally the building was designed.
And your courage there, Betsy, probably created a whole lot of education, awareness, empathy. And how do you create that within a team? Especially if you sense there's fear or uncertainty on the team, how do you create an environment where team members feel safe to speak up as you did in that room, or safe to, whatever it is that they're needing courage for?
I think it always starts with the leader, having the vulnerability and self-awareness to recognize what's the environment that you've created. And then if you're, a new leader in an organization where there's baggage or history,
Yeah.
patience is critical because it doesn't happen overnight. I'm not sure if you've heard the parable of the flea, where flea is trapped in a jar and it tries to jump, and as soon as it keeps hitting the top of the jar, eventually you take the jar off and the flea who could jump clearly out of the
Mm,
jar doesn't anymore because they've learned that that's their ceiling. And
mm,
I think as leaders, depends on what stage we're entering the organization, what's happened before. That takes patience, time, asking great questions, and is it a mixture of me as the leader? Is it the environment? Is it the way that people have been treated in the past? And so all of those come in to make this pot of a soup that you got to eat one bite at a time. And
yeah.
some moments it's going to require more patience. Sometimes it's going to take more on the leader to change their style or their habits. But there are so many factors. And every time you add someone new to the team, like it changes the
Mm,
dynamics a little bit. And did they have baggage from a past place or a past boss? And so you've got to be constantly working at it. It's not something
mm.
like once it's done, fixed, and then it's over.
Yeah, I love the flea analogy because it really connects to, I work a lot with confidence, and I do a lot of coaching around confidence and potential. You talk a lot about unlocking potential, and it's so true, that idea of, you're jumping to the ceiling that the lid's off. You don't know it exist, what that ceiling is. So how do you help clients, see in themselves the potential that they don't see yet? How do you work with clients in that way?
Some of that goes back to, the majority of my clients are small, medium-sized companies, um, and the private club industry, and that adds a whole nother level of like, what does someone else want for the organization? What do you want for the organization, especially in private clubs, right? Because, the what the club wants is likely been established for years or decades
Mhm.
before, and or could be changing based on the current board. But what I like to do is work with the CEO or the individual, the GM, to really help them establish for themselves what do they want. Because when you're
Mm,
more personally connected to what you want, you can that's your like North Star. So you can continue
yeah.
to drive at what do we need to do next to achieve that. And so it's really starting back, and sometimes that's helping someone go back to like, what did you want when you built out this company? What did you want when you took this job? And enticing that younger self. Maybe it is only 2 years younger, could be 10 years younger. If, like I was sharing with my friend, he's built his own company out for 10 years and he's been through different iterations of what he's wanted for the company. But constantly we go back to, why do anything if not to have built something and built something of greatness? And so I think it starts there. And then it's having really hard, sometimes, most of the time, having hard conversations about what's limiting us from achieving what we want to do. And then talking about who's on the team, like who's on the team and how are we protecting the individuals on our team that are helping to drive at those successes, recognize them, support their growth, and then how do we recruit and attract individuals that are of similar mindsets and fill the fill the gaps in what we need on the team to achieve. Um, and then who are the people and how do they show up on a day-to-day basis caring about each other? Because I think that can supersede so many other faults or failures when people just genuinely feel cared for, and feel like they work on a team where people do care about the organization and each other.
Yeah. And recognizing, like you said, the lid is their limiting beliefs that usually are coming from the self. It's
Hmm.
usually that lid is usually not something that's been imposed or some structure. It's usually some internal belief. So, talking about support and caring, how do you support and care for the people on your team, but also challenge and push them? How do you work on those two p- seemingly opposing ideas?
I mean, the first part is time, just time. I'll give Jeffrey, and I'm not sure, if he came up with it on his own, and he can give credit where is due. When we would onboard new leaders, and I remember the first time that he did it, in a leadership lesson that we were in, he said, "How do you spell love?" And played a little game of hangman, and E is the last letter on how do you spell love, and it really tripped everybody up. And say it's 4 letters long, but it's time. And I think that's so true, not just even in a professional work setting, but with family and spouses and children. And so it starts with time. It just starts with truly getting to know the individual personally, professionally, but having a relationship by which that it's authentic, that people know that I care about them. And then from there, it's building up, whether or not it's asking hard questions or giving tough feedback. But I was told that people would often come into my office asking for advice and leave with 3 things to do, or having gotten a life lesson that they didn't anticipate coming in for.
Yeah.
But they would always come back. I don't think I seldom shy away from an opportunity to challenge whatever is there and challenge one next step. Or if someone might be coming in to ask for advice or complain about another person or another situation, and I redirect it back to them. That comes from the only thing we can control is ourselves. Whether or not it's controlling our perception of the situation, or it's controlling how we're contributing to the conflict or contributing to the challenge, or we're not getting what we want. Okay, well then, have you had the conversation? Have you asked, what can I do differently so that I can get whatever it is that you're seeking? And I have found is certainly people with high levels of self-awareness, which is like a mother skill and can determine so many other areas of success. Those relationships only continue to grow and get stronger and stronger, because in the moment, yes, people are feeling maybe icky in the conversation because feedback doesn't feel great in the moment, but they walk away feeling empowered and challenged to do something with a problem. It starts out certainly from just building an authentic relationship, but challenging challenging their mindset, challenging the situation, but but always giving it from a place of they're empowered to then do something and be put back in the control seat.
Great. And what role, Betsy, does empathy play in courageous leadership?
This was a HBR article once. It sat with me profoundly, in that I would say empathy is the precursor to what really impacts courageous leadership, and that's compassion. Whereas empathy, you can get caught up in this feeling for someone, But when I think of courage, I think of action, and therefore I think of compassion, where you're able to feel in compassion. We can deepen our awareness of what we understand that they're feeling. And then compassion is where the courage comes in, because it's compassion to then ask the question, challenge them to do something about the situation, and probably is a good capstone word to what we were just talking about earlier. It's compassion to listen, but also give action to support whatever it is that they're setting off to achieve. Because otherwise, without the empathy, then you're probably just being a jerk. Right? Like if you're not,
Yeah.
if you're not listening intently to be able to empathize, to be able to know that person and what grounds them, what their drives are, then that's the hard part with empathy. Sometimes you can just get stuck in like this only feeling,
Mm.
but you have to be there. You have to sit there too. You have to feel it to
Yep.
know, like, how hard do I push today? Or is today just a moment to listen and then follow back up tomorrow?
Yeah. And sometimes, absolutely what you said, it's just sitting with them and connecting with them on that feeling, right? We might not have had that same exact experience, but you've had that feeling. All humans, right? We've all felt the range of emotions. So, whatever emotion that person is feeling, how do you connect on that level? And then, right, encourage them to take action.
And that's been, as I look back, how in my career and in my life experiences, there was a time in my life where I was, okay, I'm not sure, God, why this situation occurred, and really it was not by my own doing, so not to take the victimhood out of it, but just like, why? As I look back now, there's two parts to this. One, I'm like, okay, were all of these, some of these life experiences so that I could empathize with more people, so that I could truly be in a room with them and they're telling me something very, very challenging that they're going through. And I could actually empathize. While I wasn't in their specific shoes, I was in a very similar situation. I also think a huge part of empathy and compassion is being connected to yourself, in that, you said it, Lindsay. It's like empathy is being able to sit in that emotion with
Mm,
them. Well, if you're not regulated in your own emotional capacity, and you're not aware of your own emotional
mm.
presence in a situation, then you could go through tough or great times. And if you're not connected to it emotionally, can make it very challenging to be empathetic later, because you don't feel that emotion.
So we at Plum work a lot with people who are leading others. So if you were to come into our Manager Essentials program and give our managers a piece of advice on how do they lead with courage when they might be faced with fear or uncertainty or not knowing how, what advice would you give them?
Start by doing work on what your personal values are. I believe that whatever the challenge is in front of you, when you can connect it to your personal values, you're more likely to take that courageous next step. Whether or not it be one of your personal values is, you want to help people. Okay, well, you're frustrated with a peer or someone that you're new to leading and they're not accomplishing the goal. Well, if your value is to help people, then by standing there not saying anything, are you helping them? If your value is to help make others better or make the situation better, you can apply the same logic. When you can take it back to what your own personal values are, that ignites something in us differently than anything external. And so it's bridging that connection. One thing that's been so important to me in the most challenging times is to know that I can look back and believe that I did it the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And that becomes very personal, in a sense that, okay, would I have done it again in this situation? Probably not, because it's not the right time, the right reason, or the right moment in that particular time. And what do we have if we don't connect it back to, when we take action, that there's something connected to it, what's important to us? Um, and as human beings, like, we don't seldom do things just for ourselves. So there is an interconnection to others, whether or not that be caring or helping others, or I want to be the best and I want everybody else to be the best with me so that they can be more and more successful. So I think going back to your values, your own personal values, and then therefore challenging your personal values to say, how can I show up courageous in this moment that feels authentic to me and what I want to accomplish?
Beautiful. I love that. Starting with values. It's helpful as an athlete, as a young athlete, it's helpful as a young professional, and it's helpful at any part of our life. It helps us with decisions, it helps us showing up the way we want. So I love that piece on values. Thank you, Betsy.
Well, and it's your values, not, I don't know, and I certainly don't do enough work in this space to say that our values change, but I think we're refining them and defining them.
Mhm.
And, Brene Brown talks a lot about that too, right? Just that if if I'm going to live by my values, then I want to show up by my values.
Mm.
And therefore, if I'm not going to do something or take action on something, well, maybe that actually doesn't define my values. So, the more and by deciding if I'm going to take courage to do something, that might in its own moment help you define what your values are, because it
Yeah.
is either worth it or not worth it to you to take that action, say that thing, um, take that next step. Because if it's not that worth it to you, then maybe it isn't actually, those aren't your defining values.
Yeah,
So in
sometimes there
those
is
moments,
depth in
accepting.
inaction,
Yeah.
right? Exploring why didn't you take action? That might also help you define your values. So, Betsy, we're going to move on to the lightning round. So, I'm going to ask you a couple leadership questions. The first thing that comes to mind, my first question is, what's one word that describes your leadership style?
Challenger.
Challenger. Love that. I've not heard that one. A book or podcast that inspires your leadership.
I mean, there's so many. Lean In. I think because it's Sheryl Sandberg and, this
Classic.
is older,
Classic.
but she's full of courage and vulnerability and
Yeah.
grit. I don't speak too much about leading from a female seat. I don't talk about that, but it is part of who I am and how I show up in different
Mhm.
meetings, or when the opportunity is appropriate, that I lean in and talk about that. She certainly has been a very impactful writer in my career, and being one of the first female COOs, and her just talking about it, and inspires me to help other women in ways how it shows up differently in different settings. So there's so many through lines in her work.
And it was a really powerful book for me that I absolutely still think about, refer back to,
Yeah,
inspired and
hers,
motivated. Yeah.
she talks about, wanting to get pregnancy parking when she was pregnant, massively pregnant with the twins. And I think about that moment when the story I was sharing earlier about the
Yeah.
boardroom and the co-ed, and Mark Zuckerberg says to her, okay, well, you're the COO. Who else is going to ask? Like, of course, just go do it, And so I think about, there are moments with courage when I think about, her example in that particular moment of like, if not you, then who? Like, do
Right.
it. Like, you're in a seat, you're in a position, you have the influence, like, say it, ask the question, challenge it.
Yeah. I really big into habits. So what's a habit or ritual? Maybe, I don't know if you have a morning or evening one that really grounds you or starts your day or ends your day.
You know, I need to work on all of that, especially right now with everything having just changed. I'll say one that was really grounding for me was actually my commute. It was my commute, and what the between thinking time or talking to my mom every morning, there was something extremely grounding about that, to be able to just talk about the day, talk about, what's going on. But it was a way that was stress relief. Um, to start the day, and stress relief, just being able to check in and, have a laugh, whatever it was for that day. So yeah, my habits are all over the place right now, just having transitioned from 9 to 5 in the
Yeah,
office to working from home. So you might have to come back and ask me. I
I
hope
love it.
that
Yeah,
one. 3 months.
I'm gonna check in on you because it's so true. Moving from, because I've done something similar, Betsy, where I used to work in corporate in an office every day, 5 days a week, and that commute was really powerful for me too. It's like a signal to the start of the day or a signal to
Yeah.
decompress the day. And when you're now an entrepreneur and running your own business, there isn't that definition. And what's a piece of advice if you were to talk to Betsy when she was 19 or 20, what advice would you have for her?
I would have the advice that everything has its purpose, and don't be so hard on yourself. And while I couldn't see the meaning from some of the life experiences, I can look back now, and my family always believed in everything happens for a reason. And you may not understand what the reason is until months later, or in my case, sometimes it was years later for a few things.
Yeah.
But yeah, just everything will work out, and don't beat yourself up too much.
Yeah. Love that. So my last question, and this is a finish your sentence question. Leadership is
Leadership is meeting people where they're at, understanding where they want to go, and then being a unstoppable cheerleader to help them get there.
Thank you so much, Betsy. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And
Yes,
thanks,
thank you.
Betsy.
This was fun.